who will present the institutional point of view. It will be Mr. Claus Kondrup, senior expert of DG CLIMA on the European Commission, and he will present the European Commission's technical guidance on the climate proofing infrastructure in 2021-2027. So, Mr. Kondrup, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Very good. And I hope you can see the slide.
We do see the slide, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really great to be here and some very interesting presentations before me. So thank you very much. I will present the technical guidance on the climate proofing of infrastructure in the period 2021 to 2027. And that is the 7-year EU long-term budget period that we are in for the moment. So that's why we have the 7 years. And the guidance that I'm going to present responds to requirements on climate proofing of infrastructure, which you find in legislation for various EU funds in this budget period 21 to 27. It's also linked to the principle that all EU expenditures should be consistent with the Paris Agreement, and it's linked also to the European climate law. Let me see if it works. It is. So the guidance was adopted by the European Commission in July last year, and it was then published in the EU official journal. And since this is the EU, it was published in 23 languages in September. And it's intended for EU-funded investments in infrastructure, but of course you can also use it for infrastructure that's not funded by the EU. So the new guidance is for the period 21 to 27, but it builds on lessons learned from major projects in the previous 7-year budget period from 2014 to 2020. And major projects are large infrastructure projects from 50 to 75 million euro and up. So many of the EU member states are already familiar with the climate proofing of infrastructure, like in transport. So what we have now in the period 21 to 27 is several things. The overall climate target for the EU long-term budget has increased from 20% in the last 7 years to now 30%, and that means more climate action. And climate proofing will cover more EU funds than ever before, and a wider range of types and sizes of infrastructure projects. So it will no longer be restricted to the so-called major projects. As regards the mitigation of climate change, the guidance includes an updated and more ambitious approach to the quantification and monetization of greenhouse gas emissions. As regards the adaptation to climate change, the climate vulnerability and risk assessment benefits from various developments. For instance, the large investments in the European Space Programme and the EU-funded Copernicus Climate Change Service, which now makes reliable and quality-assured climate data available for free to support the climate resilience work. The move away from major projects to a wider range of EU funds calls for guidance on documentation and verification of the climate proofing process, and that is now covered by the guidance as a new thing. The new guidance covers in detail the coordination and thereby potential time and cost savings between climate proofing and environmental assessments, notably the Environmental Impact Assessment EIA and the Strategic Environmental Assessment ACA. And the guidance also includes in Annex F recommendations reflecting lessons learned from major projects on how individual member states can support the climate proofing of infrastructure in their territory. The climate proofing process is divided in 2 pillars, which reflect the important difference between climate change mitigation and adaptation and the different policy objectives. We treated differently the 2 pillars. The split in 2 phases brings efficiency gains in response to a legal requirement laid down in the InvestEU regulation. So on the slide, you have climate neutrality to the left and climate resilience to the right, and you have phase 1 with the green background and phase 2 with the maroon background. So a range of EU funds may support investments in infrastructure. And you find in the fund-specific legislation the definition of what is eligible infrastructure under that particular fund. And the climate proofing guidance is drafted with a wide range of infrastructure in mind. So it's not focusing as such on road transport infrastructure or road pavements. So here on this slide, we look at the mitigation of climate proof, the mitigation pillar of climate proofing. And it illustrates the screening phase with green background to the left and the detailed analysis to the right. The guidance includes a screening list of various types of infrastructure, including transport, which in many cases will simplify the work. In other cases, like inland waterways, it may be necessary to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions and compare with threshold values in the guidance. The detailed analysis in phase 2 includes quantification and monetization of greenhouse gas emissions, which the guidance refers to the carbon footprint methodologies of the European Investment Bank, the updated shadow cost of carbon published in the EIB Climate Bank roadmap. If you move on to the second pillar, climate resilience, the approach aims at identifying and assessing the climate risks, which then can be addressed through relevant adaptation measures. These measures will have to be identified, appraised, planned for, and implemented. There is considerable uncertainty involved in this exercise, among others from the future level of greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, which, notably for long-lasting infrastructure, warrant regular monitoring and follow-up of critical design assumptions. And we cannot build and then just leave our infrastructure without keeping an eye on it. But on the other hand, the guidance provides for flexibility and stepwise adaptation, which can be more cost efficient and attractive. In addition, infrastructure investments should give due regard to adaptation strategies and plans at various levels of governance, member states, regional, local. Finally, the climate proofing process and related decisions should be documented, which you find in the middle of the slide at the bottom. The documentation will usually be an important part of the investment decision. And the climate proofing documentation is intended as a relatively short, summarizing document, typically in the range of 10 to 20 pages. However, it should then be possible as part of the preparation of the investment decision to query and obtain further insights into the underlying documentation from the project developer. Coming to the second last slide, the guidance emphasizes the integration of climate proofing into the project cycle management, which is common for infrastructure projects. Moreover, the guidance elaborates on the close links to environmental assessments, the EIA and the SEA, and details are included in Annex D and E of the guidance. So that is a very quick run through of the guidance on climate proofing that we published. It's about 100 pages and it's available for free from the official journal of the EU, and you find a link on the, I think, slide number 2. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kondrup, for this presentation. Obviously, when we look at your slides, the topic is very complex and incorporates a lot of different criteria, and it certainly requires some time for analyzing and going to the different details with the approach regarding mitigation, climate neutrality, and adaptation and climate resilience. I think that we have a question again from Stefan, please. Your mic is off, Stefan.
Sorry.
Okay, we hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Kondrup, for a very interesting presentation. I have a few questions. First one is technical. On page 3, you mentioned EIB carbon footprint. Or carbon calculation. So I guess EIB is the European Investment Bank, but why why do you mention? I mean, do they have a tool that should be used in this analysis? So I don't understand why. Yeah, why they are mentioned, or if I'm right, that is the right meaning of EIB. So I don't know. Yeah.
If I can answer that one, the EIB is indeed the European Investment Bank. And for the mitigation pillar of climate proofing, we use the carbon footprint methodology developed and implemented by the European Investment Bank. And that's what we have tried also in practice for the major projects.
Okay.
And it's possible to use other methodologies, but the EIB methodology is documented and ready to use for many types of infrastructure and acceptable. Okay. So it's supposed to be ready to use.
So it will be the reference in the European Union.
So it is the reference, but if you have something better at hand, you can also use that.
Okay. And this one is available, I guess, and we can...
There are links in the guidance to the carbon footprint methodology.
Okay.
The guidance includes also the cost of carbon that you need to include in the cost-benefit analysis.
Okay. Okay.
And
okay.
This, and I noted that the guidance is complex or long, 100 pages. It responds to the legal requirements, and they are short. Legal text is usually very brief. But then it's built on the experience and what we have tried out with major projects in the period 2014 to 2020. So it can actually be done in practice, which is really reassuring.
Okay, okay, thank you. I have another question, Christophe, but if you see somebody else.
Well, Stefan, so far, apparently, well, there's no other question, so please feel free to ask another one.
Yes, so you mentioned two steps, the screening and then the detailed analysis. So this detailed analysis in particular, so this is done in member states by the countries, by the project owners, I suppose. And then who is reviewing, who is approving the result of this analysis? Is that you? Is that the country managed on its own? How does it work?
In the previous 7-year budget period, 2014 to 2020, with major projects, we had an entire system that going through the projects, the appraisal of the projects, the development of projects, and each major project was subject to approval by the European Commission. Now, in the current period, 21 to 27, that is no longer the case. We have more funds and we have more types of infrastructure that can be funded. And there, the approval is done as part of the financing decision, which in the case of cohesion policy is done in the member state, which in the case of Connecting Europe Facility is done by the Commission. So there are different ways that the approval can take place of the project or of the funding. And that's also why we have asked for the summary of the climate proofing process, this 10 to 20 page summary. So that is to support the investment decision. And then if there are gaps in the analysis, to go deeper when that is needed.
Okay, yeah, okay, clear. Thank you.